Hello again, everyone. I thought this week that we could continue the conversation about some of the foundational things that I've been thinking about regarding the Jedi Order as a religion. And one of the things that almost immediately came to me was the symbology of the Order. Interestingly enough, and I didn't know this watching the Clone Wars, the animated TV show, there was a yin-yang symbol in that show used on the floor of the whatever that space was in between space and time, where Anakin went on one of the episodes, where he was faced with the pure light child and the pure dark child, and he was supposed to stay there to give balance to the Force, and that was the explanation in the show. You will notice, though, that symbol that was on that floor is, in fact, the avatar for the channel and the Facebook page. I actually really liked the symbol, incidentally, because it very, very closely reflects the symbology that I want to actually use. And this is something that I'm hoping will evolve over time. I really want to give a lot of thought because I want a very, very meaningful symbol. And the idea behind having the symbol is the same idea as the whole religion in general, is that it's something to simplify the thoughts and the work that we're trying to do here, so that life can be simplified, so that people can really focus on doing their best work. So the concept that I really, really appreciated that I've seen are twofold. One, the yin-yang, I think, is an amazing symbol, and there's so many ways to look at it and analyze it and think about it. And then secondly is actually from a book written by Stephen Covey. It's called The Eighth Habit. It's a follow-up to his seminal work, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in it, he creates a diagram of a person with a spirit ball in the middle. I'll show this. And then mind, heart, and body separated into thirds around the outside of that. I thought this was brilliant. When I read it originally, I was personally trying to come up with a visual concept of how to really represent a person. And I had a really hard time with it. And people think of layers and you know, somebody says onions. I was taught one time it was like the OSI model for networking, right? You have the physical layer and then the software layer and all these things. I didn't like anything I had ever heard. I had a sort of intuitive idea, and this fit the bill beautifully, but I changed it over time, at least in my head. And what I came up with was this concept here. This picture with the spirit ball in the center, heart and mind as two halves of the next layer out, and then body on the outside. And part of the reason for this is, in the book too, body, mind, heart, and spirit are also used as metaphors for the different areas of a person's life. And each area of life has different needs and different executions, but it all comes together to create a whole person. And I don't necessarily take everything literally that was described in the book. I have my own thoughts on this. I'll share them with you, and I hope you'll give me your thoughts in response. So, the reason that I use the diagram this way, in my mind, body is the very, very physical, the superficial even. Mind and heart kind of occupy the same space, and then spirit is at the center of everything. And when I think of spirit or soul, I think of a person's whole being. You know, so when we say somebody is soulful, we're really describing how they act, how they interact with other people, you know, their heart, how they think. When somebody seems to have a deep soul, or they're a very soulful person, we're really describing a very deep person on almost every level that you can think about somebody on: mind, heart, body, spirit, what have you. Even many other levels and layers if you want to go there. So in my mind, and also too, by the way, we experience things, and I'll try to go into all of this. I don't want to get too disjointed, but the reason that I laid it out this way is because I wanted a diagram that describes how each person interacts with each other as well. And if you picture a dot outside of the body of this diagram, that is every interaction you can have with another person. That's every idea, thought, experience, whatever have you. And it has to go through the physical layer first. We have to physically experience something. And depending on what it is, it's going to go through the mind to some degree and through the heart to some degree. All thoughts, experiences, whatever, are filtered through logic and feeling to more or less degree depending on the person. So that's why heart and mind are on two separate halves. Some people and some things will be thought about more logically, Some things and some people will think more based on feeling and intuition. And I want to be careful too here, because I think intuition is actually in the spirit. When I say heart and I say feeling, I mean things like anger or love or sadness. Those are the things I mean by feeling of the heart. And then finally it goes into spirit. And when I think of spirit, I actually think of what most people call subconscious, but I think it's actually superconscious. Subconscious means it lies under everything else. I think the intention is that it's foundational, but oftentimes because of the way we tend to use sub in things, it seems to carry the weight of something that means it's not as important, it's not as forward, it's not as powerful as the actively conscious mind. But it seems striking to me that we have extraordinary things like intuition, or we know something is true or false at a glance oftentimes, but we don't know why. Or we have inspired ideas, like doing this Jedi Order. And traditionally, that's assumed to be inspired by something divine, which maybe. But more to the case, I think it comes from the superconsciousness. It's the dots that are connected in the part of the brain that you aren't consciously aware of, but that operate with or without your consent, with or without you thinking about it. And then they send those thoughts back out through the conscious mind. So if you think about our dot again, something happens in the world. It's in the body, or it's in the physical experience. Then it moves in through the heart and the mind. You think about it, you feel about it. It then becomes part of your spirit or your soul, your core being. Then when it comes back out, the same thing happens in reverse. It's an intuitive idea. It goes through feelings, it goes through logic, and then it becomes a physical manifestation. You say something or you do something. And I can make an example of this very, very easily. You can come up with a memory right now at some point in your past, and it doesn't matter what the memory is per se or what the feeling is. I'd prefer that you think of something positive, but you can look back in your memory banks, something that was very important and meaningful to you. And when you think about it, you will instantly feel something. You will feel anger or sadness or joy or excitement. And then you can think about that thing. You can logically dissect the memory, and then you can share it by talking about it. Or you can act out. If you get very, very excited, you might jump or you might smile. You'll have an outward expression of that memory. And that's what I mean by this, is that the dot cycles through things. The thought or the memory or the experience. It's not straight in and straight out. It's a little bit messy, but it always has to go through that physical layer, and it always gets stored in the center, in your spirit, your whole being. Now, in the Google Doc where I've taken my initial notes, and admittedly I haven't added to it very, very much at all since I first wrote this down about a year ago, and I really do need to get back to that. I broke this down, and I'm just going to read this as I wrote it, and then talk about it if I feel like I need to expand on any of these ideas a little bit. But I want to really explain how this works and how it pertains to Jedi philosophy. So, what I wrote about the physical layer. Physical/body. The point of the body is to live. It is the superficial dimension. This is a person's outward appearance, but also the layer at which they interact with everything else in the world. It is what everyone sees of a person and what a person perceives. This is reality, actuality, everything observable and measurable. It is the layer that everything outside the self has to go through first, and everything inside will go through last. The purpose of the body is to live. It's the vessel. Body maintenance is about health, but also environment. Keeping things clean and orderly, exercise, eating, etc. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Each layer of a person's existence appears to have a purpose for being there. So the body or the physical portion of existence is to live. This was actually straight out of the Eighth Habit. The physical layer is to live. And then it goes on to learn to love and to leave a legacy. So the last line in there that says, body maintenance is about health, but also environment, keeping things clean and orderly, exercise, eating, etc. This is everything that is concerned with the physical world and the physical environment. So this also deals with nature to some extent. Our concerns about how we're taking care of the planet's ability to produce oxygen, for instance, for us to live. The literally physical world that we have to interact with and that we rely on in order for us to exist and sustain our lives. So the next layer is the heart, the emotional, and the purpose of the heart is to love. This is the social dimension. This is the feeling dimension also. It shares similar space with the mind, but is like the right brain or imagination. It's what colors a person's experience, and all physical experiences are filtered through the heart dimension to varying degrees in different people. A person will feel about all experiences, whether they are coming in from the physical or going out from the spirit. The purpose of the heart is to love. Heart maintenance is about relationships, friends, community, family, etc. So I realize this one is getting a little bit more difficult to explain or make sense of, especially when we start getting into the purposes of these things, like to love and talking about social dynamics. The heart is fed by our relationships. There is obvious, absolute scientific proof of this, as well as I think you can intuitively understand that a lonely person is not going to feel good in their heart. So in taking care of the whole person, a whole being, we need to be concerned about things like their relationships with friends, community, and family. Because, for instance, community is so important, we need to have that as an integral part of the way that this whole thing operates. And making sure that whatever the philosophy is, it takes into account its impact on the community, its impact on people with their friends and family, and making those relationships stronger, better, making those people better in those relationships. If we're going to talk about and work on maintaining an individual's heart space, we have to make sure that it takes into account those things that affect the heart, and that's other people. In worrying about this particular area of life, the social dimension, the heart of the individual, we need to take into account the hearts of many. It's a very interdependent way of thinking about life. One thing I should mention here too, one of the thoughts that I've had is, as far as a church, our central place of gathering, a building, if you will, my ideal also formulates the building around these concepts. I would love to have a place, a community center, where everything that we are concerned with, body, mind, heart, spirit, has a specific place set up within the building where somebody can maintain these things. So for instance, we should have the capacity to work with somebody to deal with perhaps their traumas, or to deal with a relationship that's not going well, to act as a mediator, to help a person learn the skills, for instance, to deal with their emotional needs, their physical needs. I think it'd be really great to have a gym that anybody could use at the building, for instance, or a dojo, a place to practice whatever kind of katas or martial arts you want to learn, including lightsabers, I guess, if that becomes a thing. But also a place, particularly where it regards the heart, where somebody can come to just feel good and recharge. This may include meditation. This is something that I'd actually like to talk to somebody a lot about. I am not a therapist or a psychologist. As much as I have learned about these things, without a doubt, there are professionals who could teach me a lot and could have a lot of valuable input here that I would love to get in helping me think about ways that a church or a community center or a religion or whatever you want to call this might be able to help support people in their heart, their feeling, their emotional life. So that being said, the next dimension is the mind. I wrote down mental/mind. And the goal of the mind, the purpose, is to learn. This is the academic dimension. This is relatively self-explanatory. The mental dimension is about cognitive development, knowledge, and wisdom. It's one's ability to think, learn, and teach. It acts as an intellectual and analytical filter on things to varying degrees in different people. I believe all personal perspective is an effect of the heart and mind acting on memories and observations. The purpose of the mind is to learn. Mind maintenance is about studying things like history and science, logic and reasoning, philosophy, problem solving, and the like. So this is a loaded dimension, and I think just probably based on my notes here, it seems like I have a bias towards it, and I do, admittedly. That's also why I feel like I want somebody to come in and give me some enlightened thoughts on the heart. I'm certainly more in the mind myself. But at the same time, the preeminent importance of the mind cannot be overstated. A person's ability to think, above all else, is so vital, especially in today's era where in the information age we also have free-flowing misinformation. It's really, really important that a person is able to think, ask questions, solve problems, and make informed conclusions, or draw informed conclusions. As I said, with the heart, I think that the building that we have should be able to support the development of these things. So with the mind, I think this is very obvious. A library, it would be the simplest place to start, but giving people access to things that they might not have access on their own. Largely what libraries are tending to do these days. They have maker spaces and things like that, but also classes. We should have philosophy classes. We should have philosophy debates, honest intellectual discussions, and real intellectually intense discussions to give people the tools and to teach them, for instance, that we can have differing ideas and that we can share them, think about them, and grow from the experience. So finally, we have the spirit/soul dimension. The purpose of the spirit or soul is to leave a legacy. And I have here in parentheses, where I usually said the academic dimension or heart dimension, this is the force. The spiritual dimension is an all-encompassing. All experience is drawn into it and becomes the source of things like intuition. It is the high mind, the things we know without being aware of them. It is the totality of everything about a person. All of one's thoughts, feelings, and actions feed into and emanate out from the spiritual/soul. It is who someone is, and the purpose of the spirit is to leave a legacy, or rather, the legacy and the spirit are the same. Spiritual maintenance is about cultivating a strong legacy. This is the purpose of teaching people about the Force and the way of the Jedi, and to help them produce a strong legacy to fulfill their soul. So I realize that's a lot of very loaded language and a lot of very big ideas. I think it distills down rather cleanly, though, with the sentence, the legacy and the spirit are the same. And since I also compare the spirit to the Force, we can think about these things all at once. And maybe that makes it a little easier to conceptualize. So let's try to think about what somebody leaves behind in the world, a person's legacy. What we're really describing is the things they will be remembered for. And when you remember a person, you don't just remember necessarily what they did. You remember their face, which is kind of like remembering their feelings. You remember their smile, their good days, their bad days, what have you. You remember the things they did for other people. Most people remember the things that they did for the person that's now gone, or the person they're never seeing. And it's interesting, too, this person doesn't have to be dead, per se, but maybe you're just not seeing them, and all you have from them is their memory. That's a person's legacy. And we can think about this on an individual and very intimate level with family and friends that we've known very well. We can think about it with our teachers. Teachers leave a legacy, imprints on our lives. That's their legacy. That's what their Force legacy imprinted on our spirit. Their spirit touches our spirit in that way. We can think about this on a much larger level. Thought leaders in the world, government leaders, and ancient philosophers, or any person, as a matter of fact, in history. Somebody who did something so significant in their contributions that they are remembered indefinitely. That's a legacy. But it doesn't have to be indefinite. Our legacy might be 1 or 2 generations. The important thing is it's not simply what you do. It's not simply what you thought and spoke about. It's not simply how you felt. It is all those things. Your spirit, your Force, or what the Force brings out of you, what you put into the Force, your legacy is the totality of your thoughts, feelings, and actions. What they say about you as a person and the impact they left on everybody else whose lives you touched. And the legacy, the spirit or soul, this is where we can start talking about the Force itself, light or dark side, because it's your legacy that determines whether you're on the path or not. What you're leaving behind, what you're putting out into the world, what you're producing, and how you're influencing the rest of the world is effectively how you're influencing the Force. And that feeds back onto you and determines how you are influenced by it. And I'd like to make this a little non-metaphysical, something very tangible that I think anybody can make sense of and relate to. So very, very simply. So think about this. One of the easy ways that I think there exists to delineate between Jedi behavior, so light side of the Force versus dark side of the Force, is selfless versus selfish behavior. Selfless behavior would be going to a soup kitchen volunteering, feeding people, preparing food, whatever you in particular. Just think of some charitable event, like, for instance, Habitat for Humanity. You build somebody's house for them, something like that. While you're doing this thing, you're not personally really gaining anything from it, but you're talking to people who have good hearts, for instance, and they are feeding their good intentions back into you. You're feeding your good intentions back into them. If you're at the soup kitchen serving food to people, you're seeing smiles or gratitude from people who, and oftentimes have very little to be grateful for. They're just getting by. They're just surviving. They're doing the best they possibly can. And here you are giving of yourself. It's not meaningless. And their good feelings, their gratitude, even just to see a smile from somebody. If you've ever stopped, for instance, on a street corner where somebody is begging for food or money, I've done this. Buy food, sit down, talk to them for a few minutes. You would not believe what a relief it is for somebody to experience being treated like a human for 20 minutes to an hour. Because too often people don't treat them with any sense of dignity or concern. It's like, here's $1, I got to go on about my own life. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but what effect this has on you and the effect you put into the world by doing these things. You're improving this person's life. And that can have a cascading effect. They might do something to brighten the next person's life, and so on and so forth. Furthermore, this creates a positive feedback loop to you. You feel better about yourself. You feel better about perhaps this person you didn't know. In one example, I sat down and talked with a guy. He actually had a plan for how he was going to get his life back in order. He knew what he needed to do. He was just taking steps to get there. That was somewhat comforting, because I knew at some point this man's suffering was going to end. Whereas if you just walk by, person after person after person, you see nothing but misery all day. So in this case, the feeding of the soul and the act of the soul feeding other souls is a net positive. By selfless action, you are not only making positive impact in the world and leaving a positive legacy in others, however minuscule, you are also improving your own state of being. You're improving your relationship with the Force and moving yourself closer towards, let's say, a higher Jedi consciousness. And that's just one possible example. There are many layers and heights at which this could be accomplished. And actually, this reminds me of something I forgot to bring up in the last discussion that I want to point out here real quick. I almost got into talking about my thoughts on roles for Jedi. Like, I had briefly said something about Jedi Knight as somebody who would be working at the church, for instance. So then I think about, what is a Jedi Master or a council position or things like that. I have given some thought to what a Jedi Knight would be. Because I think the term Knight must refer to work. And I thought about what the Jedi Knights did in the actual mythos of Star Wars. And I think a Jedi Knight would very, very specifically refer to somebody who decides to go into public service of some kind, civil service, public service, where their job, their efforts, the things that they are doing for work must necessarily benefit society as a whole. So here's what I mean by this in example. Imagine somebody belongs to the Jedi Order, decides that they're going to be a police officer, military personnel, or a government official. These positions, by their very nature, require somebody to think about everybody in society. And we can, of course, debate all day about whether or not people in these roles actually do, and it's really on a case-by-case basis. So I think it's actually very, very useful to think about somebody in these positions as a Jedi Knight. And they should subscribe to a very particular set of rules and ideals. And the reason I pick this specifically is because I thought about the Jedi Knight's code and creed and some of the things like not having attachments. And that's very, very harsh. And I think it's quite a lot to ask of somebody just as part of the religion or even executing on the religion. I think there's some examples in the world that we can look to for instance, why asking a leader of a church to be celibate might not be a great idea. why that might be a bit too much and a bit too extreme, and not really help them effectively execute on their positions anyway. However, if you are in a role of public service, as the example is given, officer, government, or military, your job absolutely needs to be to think about everybody but yourself first. I think this is important. I'm not asking people to completely disregard their well-being. I don't think that that's ultimately a good idea. However, when you are dealing with positions of this nature, it's so important to effective execution in those positions that you're able to be dispassionate and let go of the things you might want for yourself or the people that you directly care about. For instance, I'll go through each one of them. As an officer of the law, I find it unconscionable that there are two different sets of rules for officers and the people they know, their family, friends, what have you, and the rest of the people they are supposed to be serving in the public interest. As a Jedi and a police officer, it should be a core part of their commitment to their job to forsake their attachments, to forsake what they want for themselves and the people that they know most intimately in the interest of the overall public good, the overall betterment of society. And again, this is an ideal. A lot of these ideals, I understand, are hard to execute, and they may even be somewhat unrealistic and idealistic, but that's the point. It's supposed to be something to reach up to, and I think there's very real parallel between the job of a Jedi, for instance, and the job of a civil servant. So, continuing on though, in the purview of the government, this is possibly the most obvious example, because campaign contributions, hands being shaken behind scenes, anything like that, any personal gain you can render yourself as a part of, your time in government office should not at all affect how you execute in that role. And this is specifically why I think of these people as qualifying as Jedi Knights, because it's a lot to ask to tell somebody, you don't matter, your family doesn't matter, your friends don't matter. Your role in this position is to think about everybody as a whole. Not you and what you can get out of it, but of what is going to happen to everybody in society as a whole as a result of your actions. And that is an enormously tall order. That is a lot to ask of somebody. And for that reason, too, I believe the role of Jedi Knight should be given with the most incredible level of respect and reverence. And it should also be given very cautiously. It should be earned. And finally, the last example, I think, goes without saying, because these principles are ingrained in you in the military. The entire job description is about self-sacrifice for the greater good. So that's the whole point. That's the idea, and why I think it should be a very reserved title for select people. But also, I think it's important that the code of a Jedi Knight is very clearly spelled out in terms of what's good, what's bad, and why. And I want to be very clear about something here as well. I'm not suggesting that a Jedi Knight should be celibate. What I am suggesting is in the execution of their duties, in their work, it's important that, this is the best way to put it, they forsake personal attachments. So I think that's long enough for now. If you've listened, I want to thank you. If you have any thoughts, please feel free to share them, and hopefully we can get this conversation going. Everybody, if you haven't checked it out already, we have the Facebook page and the Facebook group. I've been uploading these to SoundCloud and YouTube, and I will continue to do so. And I'll try to start posting some more things, just some fun things. But I want to be very careful to stay away from too many tongue-in-cheek posts. I don't want this to be taken as a joke. Even though I personally am a very humorous and not serious person when it comes to most things, this is very serious. And should it go in a strong direction, should it take off in any way whatsoever, I realized this will be a core part of my legacy, even if my name is not necessarily attached to it. So I want to do a very good job with it. That being said, everybody take care of yourselves. And of course, may the Force be with you.